Every country will be part of the United States of America by the end of 2026. Sounds crazy, right? Sounds like some wild conspiracy theory. But when you look at what President Trump has actually done in just the last year, you stop and think about that. Let me make this clear for you. In just over a year since returning to the White House, Trump has launched military operations in Venezuela, threatened to seize Greenland from a NATO ally, withdrawn the United States from 66 international organizations, sparked the biggest trade war in modern history, and basically told the rest of the world that the old rules don't apply anymore. And whether you love him or hate him, whether you think this is brilliant strategy or reckless chaos, you can't deny this. The world you knew a year ago is not the world you're living in today. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna break down exactly what's happening, why it matters, and what it means for you. No political spin, no propaganda, just the facts about how one man's presidency is literally reshaping the entire planet. Let's start with what just happened. On January 3, 2026, the United States military conducted a raid in Caracas, Venezuela, and captured President Nicolas Maduro. Think about that for a second. The United States just invaded another country, grabbed its leader, and flew him out. This wasn't some covert operation that got leaked months later. Trump announced it live, held a press conference, and basically told the world he'd do it again if he wanted to. Now, the justification kept changing. First, it was about fighting drug cartels. The Trump administration labeled two Venezuelan groups as terrorist organizations and said they were flooding America with cocaine. Then it became about democracy and human rights. Then, and this is where it gets really interesting, Trump stood at that podium and made it crystal clear. This is about oil. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves. Trump literally said American oil companies would run Venezuela and get reimbursed through oil revenue. Let that sink in. The President of the United States openly admitted that a military operation was designed to benefit American oil companies. That's not some conspiracy theory from the far left. That's what he said. But here's where it gets complicated. The operation cost over $600 million, about 200 elite Special Forces troops, 150 aircraft, multiple naval vessels, all to capture one guy. And when the smoke cleared, Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, took over. The same regime, the same brutal apparatus, just a different face. Trump sidelined Maria Corina Machado, the Democratic opposition leader who actually won the last election, and cut a deal with regime insiders instead. From Venezuela's perspective, and from much of Latin America's perspective, this looks like old-school American imperialism with a new paint job. The Monroe Doctrine rebranded as the Don Roe Doctrine. Except this time, it's not about keeping Europe out of the Western Hemisphere. It's about the United States asserting total dominance over its neighbors. International law be damned. And that's not just Venezuela's opinion. Colombia, Mexico, Cuba, they're all watching this and wondering if they're next. Because Trump didn't just stop with vague threats. He explicitly suggested military action against Colombia might sound good. He said Cuba is nearing collapse and the US might need to intervene. He warned that America has to do something about Mexico. Now let's talk about Greenland. Yes, Greenland. Because while you were probably focused on Venezuela, Trump was simultaneously threatening to invade a NATO ally to take control of an island covered in ice. Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark. Denmark is one of the founding members of NATO. NATO is supposed to be an alliance where an attack on one is an attack on all. But in January 2026, Trump refused to rule out using military force to seize Greenland, threatened Denmark with 25% tariffs unless they handed it over, and his senior advisor, Stephen Miller, went on CNN and said nobody would militarily challenge the United States over Greenland anyway. Think about the implications here. The President of the United States is threatening to attack an ally, a NATO ally. The Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, didn't mince words. She said, if the United States attacks Greenland, NATO is over. Everything stops. The entire security framework that's kept the peace in Europe since World War II collapses. But why does Trump even want Greenland? Well, there's 3 reasons, and they're all strategic. First, location. Greenland sits between North America and Europe. right in the middle of the Arctic. If Russia launches missiles at the United States, they fly over Greenland. If you control Greenland, you control early warning systems and missile defense for the entire northern hemisphere. Second, minerals. Greenland has massive deposits of rare earth elements. These are the materials you need to make smartphones, electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, basically everything that drives the modern economy. Right now, China controls about 70% of rare earth production globally. Greenland could change that equation. Third, climate change. As the Arctic ice melts, new shipping routes are opening up. Routes that cut thousands of miles off traditional paths between Asia and Europe. Whoever controls Arctic territory controls access to those routes. And both Russia and China have been massively increasing their presence in the region. So Trump's argument is, we need Greenland for national security. But here's the thing, the United States already has access to Greenland. There's a defense agreement from 1951 that gives America military basing rights. There's already a U.S. space base there called Pituffik with about 150 personnel. So the question becomes, why do you need to own it? Trump's answer? He said full ownership is psychologically needed for success. That's a direct quote. Not strategically needed, not militarily essential, psychologically needed. And when European allies pushed back, when France, Germany, the UK, Italy, Poland, Spain, and Denmark issued a joint statement saying Greenland belongs to its people, and only Denmark and Greenland can decide its future, Trump threatened them with tariffs, 10% tariffs on all of them, rising to 25% unless they supported his plan to take Greenland. Let me be clear about what that means. The President of the United States threatened economic punishment against America's closest allies for not supporting the seizure of another ally's territory. That's unprecedented. That's not how alliances work. That's not how international relations have worked for 80 years. Now, Trump eventually backed down at the Davos conference in late January. He said he wouldn't use military force or tariffs to take Greenland, but the damage was done. According to polling from November 2025, most Europeans no longer consider America a reliable ally. They're rearming. They're making plans for what NATO looks like without the United States. Because if the US president can casually threaten to invade one member to take another member's territory, what's NATO even for? Here's where it gets even more complicated. While Trump was threatening Greenland and invading Venezuela, he was also fundamentally reshaping the global economy through tariffs, and this is where the impact hits your wallet directly. On April 2, 2025, Trump declared a national emergency and invoked emergency powers to impose what he called reciprocal tariffs on basically every country on Earth, a baseline 10% on almost everything, with much higher rates on specific countries and products. The goal, according to the administration, was to eliminate the U.S. trade deficit and bring manufacturing back to America. Let's look at the numbers. By November 2025, the effective U.S. tariff rate hit nearly 17%. That's the highest it's been since 1935. For perspective, before Trump's second term, the average was about 2.4%, so we're talking about a seven-fold increase. On Chinese goods specifically, tariffs hit 145%. China retaliated with 125% tariffs on American products. Direct trade between the two largest economies on Earth basically collapsed. U.S. imports from China fell 25% in the first 3 quarters of 2025. But here's what a lot of people don't understand about tariffs. They're not paid by foreign countries. They're paid by American importers, who then pass those costs on to you, the consumer. The Tax Foundation calculated that these tariffs amount to an average tax increase of $1,000 per U.S. household in 2025, rising to $1,300 in 2026. That's money out of your pocket, higher prices at the store, higher costs for businesses. And because tariffs raise the cost of imported materials, They actually hurt American manufacturers who depend on those materials to make their products. The stock market went nuts. April 2025 saw the biggest daily swings in years. Companies couldn't plan. You'd have one tariff rate announced, then it'd be suspended, then it'd be changed, then a new rate would pop up for a different product. The chaos itself became as damaging as the tariffs. Now, Trump's supporters will tell you this is negotiating strategy, that he announces high tariffs to bring countries to the table, then cuts deals. And there's some truth to that. He did negotiate agreements with 19 trading partners over the course of 2025. But here's the catch. None of those agreements rolled tariffs back to their previous levels. Most settled around 15 to 20%, which is still way higher than before. And the economic impact is real. JP Morgan projected global GDP growth would drop from 2.1% at the start of 2025 to 1.4% by the end of the year. Japan's economy contracted 2% in the third quarter. Switzerland's GDP fell 0.5%. Both cited reduced exports to the United States as a major factor. For countries that depend heavily on trade with America, this has been devastating. But here's the twist. It hasn't reshaped global trade patterns as much as you'd expect. Through October 2025, most countries' trade with the United States as a share of their total trade barely changed. Why? Because companies have deep relationships with their suppliers and customers. You don't just switch overnight. Plus, many firms front-loaded exports before tariffs kicked in, then got exemptions after lobbying the administration. About 46% of U.S. imports have been exempted from Trump's tariffs. That tells you something. When American companies screamed that these tariffs would destroy their business, the administration backed down. So you've got this system where the announced tariffs are sky high, but the actual effective rates are lower, and specific industries get carved out based on political pressure. From a business perspective, this is a nightmare. You can't plan. You can't make long-term investment decisions when the rules change every few weeks. Corporate bankruptcies in the United States hit their highest level since 2010. But from Trump's perspective, this is working. He's collected about $132 billion in net new tariff revenue in 2025. He's using that money to fund his agenda and offset his tax cuts. And he's made trade policy a central tool of foreign policy in a way no president has done in generations. So what's really happening here? Let's zoom out. Trump has withdrawn the United States from the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Agreement, and 66 other international organizations. He's gutted the State Department and completely eliminated USAID, the agency that handled American foreign aid. According to one estimate, the elimination of USAID alone resulted in 600,000 deaths as of November 2025, two-thirds of them children. Programs fighting malaria, HIV, maternal mortality, they all got cut. The justification is that these programs waste taxpayer money on foreigners instead of helping Americans. But foreign aid is only about 1% of the federal budget, and it serves strategic purposes. It gives the United States influence. It creates stability in regions where instability breeds terrorism and refugee crises. It opens markets for American businesses. When the United States pulls back, someone fills the vacuum, and right now, that someone is China. Here's what's fascinating. Trump's whole foreign policy is supposedly about competing with China, right? But according to polling from 21 countries in November 2025, more people now expect their country's relations with China to strengthen than expect relations with the United States to strengthen. Trump's approach is actually making China look more attractive. In South Africa, Russia, Turkey, Switzerland, more people see positive progress with China than with the US. Even in traditional American allies like Brazil and India, confidence in US leadership has dropped dramatically. Why? Because Trump's version of international relations is purely transactional. Everything's a deal. Everything's negotiable. Alliances aren't partnerships. They're protection rackets where you pay for American support. NATO countries need to spend more on defense and buy American weapons. Ukraine needs to give the United States access to its rare earth minerals in exchange for military aid. From Trump's worldview, this makes perfect sense. America has been played for decades. We defended other countries for free, kept global trade routes open, underwrote international institutions, and got nothing in return except debt and lost manufacturing jobs. Time to cash in. From Europe's perspective, from Asia's perspective, from Latin America's perspective, this looks like the United States abandoning its role as a stabilizing force and becoming just another aggressive power pursuing narrow self-interest. And that's terrifying, because the United States is still by far the most powerful country on Earth. If America goes rogue, if it no longer feels bound by international law or alliance obligations, if it threatens to invade allies and does invade neighbors, what stops anyone else from doing the same? Russia's already invaded Ukraine. Trump hosted Putin at the White House and got nothing in exchange while excluding Ukraine from the talks. That sent a message. Territorial conquest is back on the menu, and America won't necessarily stop you. Trump's national security strategy, published in December 2025, doesn't even mention major power competition. Previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, framed China as a long-term challenge and Russia as an acute threat. Trump's strategy talks about managing European relations with Russia and rebalancing America's economic relationship with China. The language is conciliatory, not confrontational, but at the same time, Trump requested a 50% increase in the defense budget, specifically to build ships to deter China. So it's this weird contradiction: softer rhetoric, harder military posture, threats against allies, friendlier overtures to adversaries. What's actually happening is that Trump sees the world in terms of spheres of influence. The Western Hemisphere is America's sphere. The United States should dominate it completely, hence Venezuela, hence Greenland, hence threats to Colombia and Mexico. But in other regions, Trump's willing to cut deals with whoever's in charge. Putin, Xi Jinping, it doesn't matter. No moral judgments, no ideological crusades, just transactions. This is a fundamental break from 75 years of American foreign policy. Since World War II, the United States has promoted a rules-based international order. International law, human rights, democratic governance, free trade. Not because American leaders were altruistic, but because they believed a stable, open world served American interests. Trump's throwing that out. He's saying the rules-based order was a scam that hurt America. We're going back to a world where might makes right, where big countries dominate their regions, where deals matter more than principles. And look, there's a legitimate debate here. Maybe the old system did advantage other countries at America's expense. Maybe globalization did hollow out American manufacturing. Maybe endless wars in the Middle East did waste trillions of dollars and thousands of lives for nothing. Trump's supporters have real grievances, and they're not all wrong. But there's also real danger in what's happening. When the United States tears down international institutions, when it threatens allies, when it uses military force without authorization from Congress or the UN, when it openly pursues regime change for corporate profit, it erodes the very foundations that have prevented major power wars for 80 years. We're seeing countries rearm at rates not seen since the Cold War. We're seeing alliances fracture. We're seeing the emergence of what analysts call a multipolar world, where there's no clear leader, just competing power blocks. And historically, multipolar worlds are unstable. They're where miscalculations happen, where regional conflicts spiral into global ones. So let's talk about what this means for you. First, prices. Those tariffs are real. They're making imported goods more expensive. Electronics, clothing, cars, anything with components from overseas costs more now. And even things made in America often use imported parts, so they cost more too. If you're buying a car, a phone, basically anything in 2026, you're paying Trump's tariff tax. Second, jobs. The promised surge in manufacturing employment hasn't happened. Job growth slowed significantly in 2025. Some factories did come back, but the cost of protecting those jobs through tariffs is enormous. You're essentially subsidizing a small number of manufacturing workers by making everyone else pay higher prices. Third, global stability. When the world's most powerful country becomes unpredictable, everyone's security decreases. Companies can't invest. Countries can't plan. the risk of conflict goes up. If you were thinking about studying abroad, or taking a job overseas, or investing in foreign markets, all of that just got riskier. Fourth, alliance relationships. A lot of Americans have family in Europe, do business in Asia, vacation in Mexico or Canada. Those relationships are strained now. Anti-American sentiment is rising. When the president threatens to invade Greenland or bombs boats in the Caribbean without clear legal authority, people around the world start seeing America differently. Fifth, climate and global health. The United States pulled out of international climate efforts. Cut funding for global health programs. Those problems don't respect borders. Pandemics spread. Climate change affects everyone. When America stops cooperating on these issues, solving them gets harder, and you're the one who pays the price when the next pandemic hits or climate disasters get worse. But there's another side to this. Some people look at Trump's approach and see strength. They see a president who's willing to use American power to get things done, who's not afraid to break eggs to make an omelet, who's putting America first after decades of putting other countries first. They point out that NATO countries are now spending way more on their own defense. That's been an American goal for years. They note that some of Trump's deals have reduced tariffs in specific sectors. They argue that the world was taking advantage of American generosity, and it's time to rebalance. From their perspective, the old international order wasn't serving American interests. It was a system where America paid the costs and everyone else got the benefits. Trump's tearing it down not because he's reckless, but because it needs to be torn down and rebuilt. And there's this. Trump did get some results. He negotiated a ceasefire in Gaza, even if it's fragile and incomplete. He got China to the negotiating table, even if the final deal is uncertain. He forced European allies to take their own defense seriously. He made trade policy a priority after decades of neglect. The question is whether the methods justify the results, whether the damage to alliances, the increase in global instability, the erosion of international norms, whether all of that is worth whatever gains Trump achieves. And here's where it gets really interesting. We don't actually know yet. A lot of what Trump's doing is unprecedented. We've never had an American president threaten to invade NATO allies before. We've never had tariffs this high in 90 years. We've never had the United States so openly transactional about alliances and so dismissive of international law. Maybe this works. Maybe in 5 years, American manufacturing is booming, China's contained, Europe's paying its fair share, and we look back at this as tough medicine that was necessary. Or maybe in 5 years, we're in a recession, NATO's collapsed, China's dominating global trade, and we're isolated and weaker than before. The honest answer is, nobody knows. This is a massive experiment in real time, and you're living through it. What we do know is this. The global order that existed when you were born is changing. The assumptions that guided international relations for your entire life are being challenged. The United States is redefining its role in the world, and that redefinition will affect every part of your life, whether you pay attention to foreign policy or not. Because when the United States invades Venezuela, that affects oil prices, which affects gas prices, which affects how much you pay to drive to work. When the United States threatens Greenland, that affects NATO, which affects European stability, which affects global markets, which affects your retirement account. When the United States imposes massive tariffs, that affects what you pay for basically everything. You can't opt out. You can't ignore it. The world's too connected. What happens in Caracas or Copenhagen or Beijing affects Dallas and Detroit and Denver. So here's what you need to understand. Trump isn't just shaking up American politics, he's shaking up the entire world order. And whether you think that's brilliant or disastrous, whether you support him or oppose him, you need to pay attention. Because the decisions being made right now, the precedents being set, the relationships being broken or rebuilt, they're going to shape your life for decades. 20 years from now, when you're explaining the world to your kids, you're going to point back to this moment. To 2025 and 2026, when everything changed. When America decided to go a different direction. When the global system that emerged from World War II started to break down. Will it be replaced by something better? By a multipolar world where power is more evenly distributed? By regional blocs that cooperate when interests align? By a new American-led order that's more balanced and sustainable? Or will it be replaced by something worse? By great power competition that leads to conflict? By economic nationalism that impoverishes everyone? By the breakdown of international cooperation on the challenges that require it most? We're going to find out, and you're going to be part of that story. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about this and drop it in the comments. When you look at what's happening, when you see Trump's approach to Venezuela, to Greenland, to tariffs, to alliances, when you see this fundamental reshaping of America's role in the world, what do you see? Do you see necessary disruption of a broken system? Do you see reckless abandonment of hard-won stability? Or do you see something more complicated, something that doesn't fit into those easy categories? Because here's the truth. This isn't a simple story. There's no clear heroes and villains here. There are legitimate arguments on multiple sides. There are real costs and potential benefits. There are dangers and opportunities. And how this plays out depends partly on choices we haven't made yet, on events we can't predict, on consequences we can't fully see. What we can do is pay attention, stay informed, think critically, question what we're told from all sides. Understand that changing the world is always risky, whether you're changing it because the current system is broken or because you think you can make it better. The world's shaking, Trump's holding the sledgehammer, and all of us are trying to stay on our feet while everything around us shifts. If you found this helpful, if it gave you a clearer picture of what's actually happening and why it matters, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more deep dives like this on the topics that are reshaping your world. And seriously, drop a comment. I want to hear your perspective. Whether you think Trump's approach is genius or insane, whether you see this as America finally standing up for itself or America betraying its own values, tell me what you think.